Hello there, and another happy Friday to you. My name is Julie Hirschberg, the owner, founder of Reactive Therapy and Wellness here in the Los Angeles area, and so excited to come and hang out with you every week as we talk about what we're learning and doing here. We are in the middle of many things for our movement disorder fellowship. So we run the Schmidt Movement Disorder Fellowship, which is the only neurology-based fellowship program for PTs in the country. And a big reason why we are talking about the optimal theory today, it's a big part of what we do, and it's a big part of our March activities. So as many people know, March is Brain Injury Awareness Month. It's also the month that we host one of our biggest weekend courses, in fact, our most popular. It's called Neuropracticity 3.0, The Brain Strikes Back. And I look forward to this course every year, probably more than anything, because it's led by our colleague Mike Studer, who is just amazing. And I feel like I always learn more from him in just a couple of minutes than I often do in a whole weekend. So I'm really excited about it. And in the past, when we've had Mike Studer here teaching, we talk a lot about the optimal theory. And today, what I wanted to do is bring in some of those pieces, and in particular to brain injury. So I've been reading back through the literature, looking at some of the things from our past courses, and really reviewing some of these key concepts as they relate to brain injury. So we're going to talk about today what optimal theory means for brain injury. How can we put it in action so that the people can actually brain changes, right? And recovery. And last week, I talked about one component of it, which was the external focus. We've been talking about this a lot with dual task. We've been sharing dual task ideas. I even brought you out to the gym and showed you some of the things that we do. We had people share a lot of great ideas too. External focus is one of the pillars of the optimal theory, and the other two are autonomy and enhanced expectancies. It's a really hard word for me to say sometimes. And we're going to chat about those two today. What are they? Why are they important after brain injury? And then just some practical tips. How could you incorporate these into treatment aimed at recovery, not compensation after brain injury, because we believe in recovery after a brain injury, from mild brain injury and concussion to severe brain injury. We see changes happening, we see recovery happening, and we believe in that. So let's dive in. Let's start with talking about the optimal theory. By the way, I'll put a link in here. I could probably grab that right now. I'll put a link to the paper. This it's a heavy paper, a lot of review of science going into this theory. But this is Gabby Wolf, Rebecca Luthwaite, two people I feel very honored to have met, and their paper on optimal. So I just put that in the comments here so you can have the paper. I'm a firm believer in everybody reading the literature, but let's start with what is this, okay? Optimal is optimizing performance through intrinsic motivation and attention for learning. So it's a theory of motor learning. It has huge implications to physical therapists and occupational therapists and people recovering from brain injury. And this work comes from a really long history of motor control research, looking at how people learn skills and improve skills. And honestly, a huge piece of this comes out of sports and what people have learned for some of the best training techniques for athletes and sport. And it turns out this really is important in recovering from an injury, not only a brain injury, but an ACL injury. So this theory, what makes it unique is that it takes in beyond just like the movement, but the whole social and cognitive, emotional, motor, all of those pieces that help us move the way we move, and highlights three areas that have developed for a very long time in the motor control literature: the autonomy, enhanced expectancy, and external focus of attention. Again, we talked about external focus, so let's start with autonomy. And this is the principle that providing someone choice or control, autonomy, over their environment improves their motor learning. And we might see this. So I'll give you a couple practical things that you might think about if you're not sure what this really means. Like, these are things that you would see in therapy. So it might be control over what you're doing, the condition. So if you're working on improving walking again, maybe there's a choice about the assisted device. Maybe it's, as I heard, I was listening to Natalie today do a telehealth session in the other room. And she asked that person, well, we're going to work on these two things that you've identified. Which one do you want to start with? So maybe it's the order of the task. A lot of times it's the language. So when we talk about practical tips, I'll come to this a lot. I think the words matter with what you might be giving and how you're setting up the treatment session. And then I love this. This is one of the great examples from the paper itself, is it can also even just be an incidental choice. So in the paper, they talk about this really interesting study where people came in to learn a motor task. And on the way in, they were asked, do you want this picture up on the wall? Like we're decorating, right? Do you want this picture on the wall or do you want this picture? And that, not even related to the motor task, people who got that choice improved on their learning of the motor task. Isn't that bizarre, but also so remarkable and interesting? So, providing autonomy is so important. Why? And this is where it becomes so important in brain injury. So it enhances self-efficacy. It promotes a focus on the task versus an internal focus. So remember, we talked about external again. It focuses on the goal. It focuses on the task. It reduces the concern, like, am I good enough? Do I have this? It frees up. So because you can take out some of that worry and fear and stress, it frees up your resources to do the task and meet the goal. So that improves your performance and your learning. And when you get a choice, when you get to set up the environment, you have a lot less confusion about what's happening, a lot less fear. This also reduces cortisol. So cortisol goes up when we're kind of thrown into a task and we have no control. Cortisol goes up, dopamine goes down. But when given a choice, we also see that dopamine goes up. When it comes to brain injury and brain injury recovery, that is precisely what we want to do. We want to lower levels of cortisol, that come out with stress and fear, and increase levels of dopamine. This is what's going to drive our movement, drive how automatic our movement is. And maybe if you have had a brain injury or you're working with somebody with a brain injury, they say, like, I have to think so much about how I move or how I'm doing this. And we want to undo that. That should be automatic. So when we're driving autonomy, we drive automaticity. So important in brain injury recovery. When looking at the literature, when they put together this theory too, what you see is that when people have control over their environment, it satisfies a basic psychological need, which I think is even higher in this time of a pandemic where we have very little control over our environment. This is even more important, and even more important after a brain injury where you've lost a lot of the control to make decisions, control of movement, control of body regulation, all of those things. This is even more important. So it satisfies some of that psychological, but biological too. And this shows, if you look at the literature, it shows up for humans and it shows up for animals. So this is a fundamental need that it really, when looking at some of these in studies, is that when people have a choice, they will have more sense of reward as well. So don't we all want that? And fundamentally, for human motivation, it's dependent on us feeling like our action affects things, that we there's an outcome. And if you've experienced a concussion or brain injury where you have involuntary movements or less control of your movement, you need to start building, like, part of that recovery process is being able to return to a point of having control. So providing autonomy in a therapy session is part of improving that control. Very, very motivating for people. Um, the other thing, when the person has a choice, they're automatically more active in the learning process. And this looks to promote a deeper processing of the information as it's being learned. And we'll talk about this in a moment too, with just functional connectivity, what happens with that. Okay, so that's the autonomy piece. Let's talk about enhanced expectancies. What does that even mean, right? I remember when I first heard that, I was like, what does that mean? But essentially, what we're talking about is that the person has the expectation that there is going to be a positive effect. And we have, as humans, have a propensity to prefer positive feedback, right? About our performance or health or athleticism, any of those things. And when we hear positive feedback, and also when we hear even other people that they've had a positive outcome, it starts to release that dopamine, and we already start to have improvements. So what does this mean for therapy? One way, which I think this is a really powerful way, is vicarious experiences. So sharing other people's experience, or even having those people share their experiences, like, yes, I was here. I had a brain injury. I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't walk. And now look at me. I'm back to rock climbing, right? So that can give you a lot of hope. It gives you a positive experience, and it enhances your expectation. Now, the opposite can exist. Maybe you're in a Facebook group, or maybe you're in a sport group, and people say nothing helps. I'm not getting better. I'm just getting worse. And you can have the opposite of enhanced expectancies, right? And you can feel the weight of that as well. This is not, by the way, just like, oh, this is just like positive psychology and making me feel better. That's not what this is. It actually is changing some of the brain circuitry. So a couple of simple ways that this has been tested out and we can use in therapy is simply providing more feedback about the positive trials than negative trials. So I know we don't really do trials, but repetitions of tasks. It might even be something as simple as, let's say we did a recording of movement, that we actually picked more of the repetitions where that movement looked good and provided that as feedback. Oh boy, from like a motor imagery standpoint, even just watching those videos on repeat of great movement already starts to set that circuitry in motion. It's so powerful. This, again, you can imagine it really easily in sports. So getting a lot of positive feedback about what went well and how you performed that, amazing, if you play volleyball, like my daughter, that amazing kill, like, let's get more feedback about that than negative feedback. This, by the way, optimal theory in sport is just amazing. So that's the enhanced expectancy, giving more feedback about the good trials. Also, one of my favorites is defining success. So there was this great study with golf putt, right? So you're learning to putt, and basically having concentric rings as what is successful. The people who were given the larger successful success ring, so it was actually easier, they learned the putt with improved accuracy faster, and they held on to it 24 hours later even better. just by redefining success. So those are all ways that you can implement enhanced expectancies. Why? Why does this work? Why does this work in brain injury? Self-efficacy is a big piece. So self-efficacy changes when you have those enhanced expectancies. It influences your focus on the goal and your ability to get there, which is so important. That's pretty much what we're doing all the time in PT and OT. Also, they found that your movement system starts getting ready, already having that expectation. You get excitation or inhibition in the motor tracks. Again, after brain injury, this is exactly what you need because you're usually off balance on that excitation and inhibition. When you have that expectation of outcome, you release dopamine. Again, so important for motor learning. So all of those things are what we need in brain injury recovery. So I mentioned, let's just talk briefly about the functional connectivity. We know in brain injury, concussion, mild TBI, moderate, severe, the functional connectivity between different areas of the brain is disrupted. This is also true in depression or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, stroke. So this is not just brain injury, but we know this is very true in brain injury. And particularly the functional connectivity for motor skill learning is disrupted. So when it comes to recovery, we need to do all that we can to really drive home principles that will drive motor skill learning. And the functional connectivity tracks the learning of motor skills, and it successively gets stronger as we move to higher levels of skill. And how do we get there except to promote motor learning? So these principles of motor learning are key to recovery and true neuroplasticity, especially after brain injury where that functional connectivity has been disrupted. So I told you I would end with a few practical tips, and I alluded to the language piece. So autonomy, a big piece of it is the language that we use in as physical therapists, as medical providers, as OTs. The language is so important. So I know when I first came out and when I was in school, a lot of what I did was directing people in exercise, and I would say things like, I want you to do this precisely this way and move your scapula here and do this and do that. And that's really controlling language. I'm just going to be frank about it. It's very controlling. And if we want to provide autonomy, a suggestion would be to say, let's try this. Or what do you think about trying this? But if we do it together, the let's, it takes it into like, we're doing this together as a team. And it's not me over you, compelling you to do this movement. So that is a very, very simple way. Another really simple way is giving a choice of music. It's one of my favorite things to do here. We have it all run on Sonos. I just say like, what do you grab my phone, what do you like to listen to? And let's put it on. We also know music does amazing things for the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. So it's you get like many, many benefits from it, but it's a choice and a very easy choice to give people. So let's talk about some practical ideas for enhanced expectancies. One of my favorite is to share a story. I'm so thankful that we have worked with some really wonderful people here. Molly Parker is one of them. She's a physical therapist. You should follow her if you don't already. She's a great story of concussion, and now she's helping other people with concussion. And she readily shares videos of at the start of her program with us and at the end of her involuntary movements to much improved, and showing that story of here's somebody post concussion who went from much difficulty controlling her movement to really great control of her movement and ability to walk and get back to life and all those other great things. Sharing that video makes a world of difference for people. So I would encourage you, gather those stories and start sharing them. The more, the better. I also think, as I mentioned in the enhanced expectancy, providing normative positive feedback. One of my favorite things to do is if we're doing a test and somebody does really amazing on it. So we do a lot of tests of balance and walking and things like that. I will take out the norms and go, look at this is people in your age group and you are beyond them. You're like functioning like a 40-year-old here. I mean, don't we all want to hear that? If you're 80, but your gait speed is like a 40-year-old, hallelujah, that's amazing. So providing some of that really positive, we're not making it up, right? So that's another thing. Like this is not making up stories or anything like that, but providing that positive feedback, it, it's so powerful. So those are just a couple of examples of how you can use autonomy, enhanced expectancies within a treatment session. So I'm going to leave it at that. Last week we talked about external focus. Today, autonomy and enhanced expectancies, all with the goal of driving neuroplasticity. These are principles of neuropracticity. This is a lovely word that my friend Mike Studer just made up. These are those components of practice that are so important for driving neuroplasticity. So they're neuropracticity. And again, this is the weekend course. It's coming up in like a week, basically. I'm so excited for it. We literally have one spot left. Excuse me, one live spot. So if you are a PT or OT who really wants to be able to incorporate some of these advanced practices of motor learning to drive true recovery, especially in disorders where maybe you thought it wasn't possible, or people have said it's not possible, like cognitive disorders, like Meniere's, like chronic dizziness, functional disorders, brain injury, stroke, Parkinson's. That's the type of thing that we're doing in this course and that Mike is doing. And it really, truly is a life-changing course for me. So I put the link in there. We have one more week, but you can also grab the course recorded. It's going to be all online, and I would love to have you there. So in the meantime, thank you so much for joining me today on our Friday journey. I will be chatting more about some of these concepts next week as well. It'll be the Friday before our course, actually. So I'll continue to share what we're doing and what we love. And I'd love to hear from you. Are you using some of these concepts? How are you using them? How are you finding benefit with people with neurologic disorders and brain injury? And have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend. And thanks again.